efficiencies and things. But what we came up with was 4 ways of working, or 4 modes of operation. So rather than saying everything has to be hierarchical, some things can be done much more in a project or a program mode. Other things we probably ought to treat more as investment mode, so as if you were investing in a startup. And we had the metaphor for investment mode of, it was like Mr. Hewlett and Mr. Packard, when they had their garage in Palo Alto or wherever it was that they started HP. Well, HP probably wasn't doing, in those days in the garage, formal appraisals every quarter. Its financial probably costs and its financial accounting system was probably fairly rudimentary, because probably 90% of the effort from HP went into the technological solutions they were actually designing. And what we were wanting to explore is, what would it take for an organization like Nokia, or even like your organization, to actually make accessible to people these different ways of working, and also to think through, when would a more appropriate way of working be better? So community mode, for example, in Nokia, another colleague of Asif and mine, we did a lot of research about how do you form internal, cross-hierarchical, cross-silo communities. So the Nokia example would be software architects and developers. So those existed in various parts of the business. We had about, I think, 14,000 at the height of Nokia, people working in software development, app development, and the like. And so some worked for smartphones, some worked for the other devices, some worked in apps, and so on. And they were reporting hierarchically. And what we did was to create a community that ran across the hierarchy, that was self-organizing. We helped it, structure itself, think about itself, and how to work. But so somebody in smart devices might have a particular problem that they were working on, say with battery life or something like that for a device. They could then seek help from people in any other part of Nokia through this community. And so it could well be that the battery life problem for a smart device was being worked on and solved by people in the app development part of Nokia, because they had the skill to do it. So it was a way of, how do you unleash that kind of talent? And to be honest, you can only do that if you've got good social media, so things like SharePoint and wikis and all of those types of things. But this community formally in the end elected some, or it kind of developed some processes for managing itself. It used to represent the broader app community, architects and so on, through to the Nokia board. It became a very powerful, a very enabling force for Nokia in terms of actually pushing the boundaries around intellectual property and development. So again, challenging the status quo, thinking about different ways of working. And I believe that all of this has an implications for how you actually then go to manage change, because it changes the nature of change in and of itself. What I think organizations will be increasingly doing is moving from that notion of the default position of hierarchies. And by default, for those of you who are also sort of in, well, maybe a bit younger than me, but my age bracket, you'll remember how, when you switched on your laptop, or, well, it used to be the desktop, of course, it always defaulted to the C drive, and you used to have floppy disks to get things to read from the A drive. I think organizations have default positions, and part of our role in HR and OD and HRD, or any kind of strategy consulting, is to actually challenge those default positions and have people question, is that the best way? So what we're moving to, I think, is to open communities which are more adaptive in terms of how they work, and are also highly networked, which is what the technology of today is allowing us to do. So change is changing, I believe. Here's a great cartoon that Asif found, which I really like. And it's like, if change is changing, has OD actually kept up? Have our practices as OD practitioners kept up to date with where organizations are moving, no matter how slowly, or potentially, if they're not there yet, they certainly will be much more quicker than I think we probably believe. I've already given you this notion that 70% of all projects fail. You can look at any report from McKinsey. If you just search on this in Google, you'll find the reports. BCG, so Boston Consulting did reports on it. McKinsey have done reports. I think Deloitte have a big report out in the last sort of 6 months around it. So it seems to be an accepted phenomena that OD and change doesn't work. And we'll move on to a bit about perhaps why that is the case. And you'll see my kind of 3 little lines under here. I think there's a whole we're in danger of searching for a new rescuer, question mark. Is it the mystery and myth of OD that we're too trapped by our own history? And are there too many practitioners of OD out there where it's like every hammer needs a nail, we would say here. So they're trained in very limited techniques and consultancy skills, and so consequently, everything they see, they just refer back to one technique that they might know. And their belief is that if people do this particular technique or take this particular approach, then that will solve all their problems. And whether that approach be scenario planning or open space or whatever particular methodology that they're the expert in. So I would ask you to think for a moment about where do you think people actually have taken their models and theories of change from, and how do they conceptualize change? And what does it look like today, and how does it differ from yesterday? So where do people take their models and theories? Now, some of you may be thinking, oh, from books and magazines. Some of you may be thinking from the Harvard Business Review or other business papers. Some of you may think, oh, well, from exposure to consultants, whether they be, single-handed consultants, people like me, or whether they be, the big five or medium-sized boutique consultants. That's where their models of theories come from. I would actually, challenge that a bit, because I actually think there's more going on. I think there's a whole issue to do, which we'll explore in a bit more detail with the generations. And this is a global phenomena, the generations. It's not just a Western European or North American one. I also think that we're more acutely attuned to life stages than we've ever been before. And by life stages, I mean, if I take the Nokia story, and I'm not breaking any confidences at all by talking about Nokia, but when Nokia made the decision to move into mobile phones, which is now about 19 years ago, the average age of the leaders who took that decision was something like 28, I think, if I remember rightly. The average age of the leaders who were taking those decisions was about 28. One of Nokia's struggles, I believe, around its current challenges is that the average age of leaders there was about 42. Now, if you think, when you're 28 years old, your relationship to risk, and certainly a lot of research shows this, your relationship to risk is very different than from when you're 42. When you're in your late 20s, there is very much, I think, in a lot of us, an area, well, let's just see what will happen. Let's throw it up in the air. Let's see where it lands. There's an excitement about risk because you've less to lose. When you're in your late 30s, early 40s, the chances are you may well have dependencies, whether it be a partner, whether it be children, whether it be elderly parents, or you've probably got a mortgage or payments to make on cars or whatever. You have more to lose. And I think so your relationship to risk becomes much more cautious and much more measured. I actually think when you move on in life and you hit your late 40s, early 50s, your relationship to risk goes back to being more of how it was when you were in your 20s. So I think there's one of the things I've started to do, and a real tip for you, if you're managing or leading large change projects, one of the first things to do is to do a life stage analysis of the people both leading the change, but also those impacted by it, because that will help you understand what kinds of resistance you're going to be facing. The new centers of gravity are provided by the internet, I think, and fall very much into making the possibility of scrutiny and transparency much easier than ever before. So instead of the center of gravity just necessarily being our immediate friends and family and social network that people who went to school, university, college, or worked with in the past, our social network now, I think, extends much more broadly to people we even probably hardly know, but may have liked something we posted on Facebook or in LinkedIn or one of the other sites like that. And they're providing us with judgment about what we're doing, about the organizations we're working for, about the kinds of changes we want to lead. And that judgment now tends to be instant judgment. I think people are not from when I was growing up, where there was time for more thought. It demands on us, the internet and email and SMS and things like that are meaning people are feeling the expectation to respond immediately to what's going on. As opposed to, like, when I worked for Shell was just implemented laptops for everybody, or one per desk for everybody and things. And prior to that, if you were wanting to contact people around the Shell world, which from the Shell is Anglo-Dutch, so from The Hague or from London, you would have to go and send a telex to people, and you would have to get this telex signed by about 4 people before you took it to the telex room, where it was women who were sat at machines typing away and sending these things off around the world. And maybe you'd wait a couple of days for a reply. And if it was felt that the telex wasn't urgent enough, then you'd have to send a letter that would go out. And Shell had its own internal postal system, but you were waiting 3 or 4 days or more for responses. With the advent of email, that judgment needed to become instant. People expected instant responses. The new center of gravity has also allowed us to test trust and authenticity around things much more and to challenge that. So, people know people now who know people. So, can you believe this leader? Can you believe this manager? What is their track record? We can find that out very quickly. We can begin to understand what their relationship to change with. And I'm sure in all the organizations you're working for, you will have had people say, oh yeah, they messed up in their last job, which is why they're here, or they did a brilliant job. People really respected them, which is really great that they're here, and so on. There's the issue of popular culture, I think that, which I'll come back to in a moment. And then what I think this instant judgment and the speed at which we're expected to work and think these days has led to us to have new relationships, both to time, space, and place. So our relationship to time, when I first started work, it very much was 9 to 5. And then when you went home, you went home. Okay, occasionally you had to work at home, but you were with your pen and paper doing it. Where now, I imagine for most of you on this call, you probably check, if you've got a mobile device with email, you probably check that email regularly while you're sat at home having a supper, television, being with friends or whatever. So that people now are expecting those kinds of responses. So the work time has bled into what was perhaps much more clearly defined 15 years ago as personal time, and hence also changing that space. For a number of you with children or with partners, I can imagine there's been conversations where people have told you to put that laptop down or stop working. It's family time now. And again, it's the home space now is much more blended with the workspace than ever before, I believe. So let's look at the generations, and then we'll move into popular culture. So these terms, again, are pretty universal. I'm hoping they resonate with you. So the notions of baby boomers and Generation X and Generation Y. So this gives you a little notion of how these generations see themselves. But also, what's the second bullet in each case is what I believe to be what their dilemmas were about the world of work. So for baby boomers, of which I'm one, I'm a late stage baby boomer, I think we saw work as being about, is it about you kind of become liberated through the work you do. So through the career choices you make allows you to self-actualize, to develop, and to become, fully who you want to be. Or is work all about social control, so conformity and so on? You kind of think of the stuff that happened in the 60s and, and everything from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones. How much is it about conformity and setting a new norm? And how much is it about work should allow me to actually fully discover, liberate myself and become who I feel I am and who I feel I want to be in the workplace? The Gen Xers, of which I'm assuming there'll perhaps be a number on the line, I believe that the dilemma that they faced about work, and I think each dilemma is sort of tempered by the previous generation. So the Gen X people saw us baby boomers faffing around at work and having a good time and talking about ourselves and what we wanted to do developmentally and so on and so forth. And I think they also economically were hit, oil crisis and things like that. And so their push has been to effectiveness and efficiency. So it's about how do we make organizations work effectively. But at the same time, I think where we were looking for personal liberation, the Gen Xers probably saw the chaos that most boomers were living in at various points and want security of place and security and a place to be that's safe. I think for the Gen Y or the millennials or the net gen, as sometimes they're called, I think there it's about being networked. It's about they want to be part of the herd. You think about their use of social media. And I can remember debates about, even just 3 or 4 years ago, should companies ban access to Facebook or LinkedIn from their